Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I am sharing with you my final check-in for my reading goals for 2021. I've been doing these updates quarterly, but for this one I'll do the last quarter update and then a quick, total or summary for the entire year, because I just don't think it's worth making an entire separate video so close to after making this one on my entire wrap-up of goals. So this will be a quarter four / end of the year check-in. So I read 17 books in October, November, December. My first reading goal was to reread one book every month, and I only reread one book, and that was Coraline. I read this aloud to my daughter, who was named Coraline after the book, and that was just a really joyful experience sharing that story with her, because that's what she was named after. So that was just really, really fun. But I didn't reread anything in November and December, and as you will see when I wrap up the whole year, this is, I think, the goal that I've been failing the most at. My next reading goal was to read a graphic novel every month, and I only read one graphic novel. It was really a graphic nonfiction, but I count that under my graphic novel heading. I read a graphic memoir in November. That was Dancing at the Pity Party by Tyler Feder, which I thought was great, but I didn't read any other graphic nonfictions or graphic novels in the last quarter. My next goal was to read one nonfiction book a month, and I met this goal. I read 2 in November and finished up 1 in December. I met this goal largely because of Nonfiction November. So, like I said, I read Dancing at the Pity Party, which is a graphic memoir. I read Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall, and I read The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester. Hood Feminism is kind of like an introductory text, I would say, about intersectional feminism, and The Professor and the Madman is about the making of the Oxford English Dictionary, but more so about the two of the main figures. The editor, well, one of the editors, but the person who worked on it the longest, and one of the main volunteers who suffered mental illness and was institutionalized while he was volunteering on the dictionary. My next goal was to read one poetry collection every month, and I read none. And actually, now that I think about it, I think I might have failed at this goal harder than the rereading goal. We'll see at the end, but I didn't read much poetry this year. I read a short story collection called Islands of Decolonial Love, and some of those short stories were so short and so poetic and lyrical, they almost felt like poetry, and perhaps they were, some of them were poems. I listened to it on audio, so I think it might not have been as obvious when things were poetry or really short stories, but I still wouldn't classify that as a poetry collection. It was very much more short stories than it was poetry, if any of it was in fact poetry. My next goal was to read at least 25% from my physical shelves here, or my ebooks that I own, and I really killed it. I read 77% from my physical shelves, books that I own. I feel really good about that because I own far too many books compared to my reading speed. So I really wanted to prioritize things that I own, so I feel really good about that, and I think that that's a goal I want to be continuing next year. I don't know that it's almost the end of the year, but I still haven't nailed down my exact goals. I don't know if I'll put a percentage or a number on it again. Remains to be seen. We'll see how I go with that. My next goal was to read 50% from my Goodreads TBR, because I feel like it's out of control and there are just so many books I want to read, and that overwhelms me. So I wanted at least half of what I read to come from that virtual TBR, and I met this goal as well. I read 51% from my Goodreads want to read list. The next goal I had for myself this year was to read 50% books from authors who were BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And I didn't do very well in the last quarter. I only read 28% from BIPOC authors. I feel okay with most of the other quarters, but yeah, this one I didn't do so great. And the last goal I had set myself was to read 50% from either Canadian authors or international authors, aka books that aren't from either the US or the UK, because so many books are published out of those two countries, and I wanted to focus on other places, and specifically Canada, because that's where I'm from, and I am not very well versed in Canlit, and I wanted to change that. This is another one I haven't been doing well on pretty much all year, so we'll see how I might extend this into 2022, or I don't know. This is another goal where I want to do something, but I think the way I'm going about it might not be the right way. Suggestions, I'll take them, but I only read 14% from either Canada or internationally, non-US, non-UK reads. I read 2 Canadian books, and that was Islands of Decolonial Love, like I mentioned, by Leanne Bedesamosake Simpson, and I also read Washington Black by S.A. Dugian, which won the Giller Prize, I forget what year. A couple other things I'll mention about the last quarter, some DNFs. So I DNF'd Entangled Life by Merlin and Sheldrake. This is a nonfiction about the life of fungus, which I find really interesting, and I don't really know why this book wasn't working for me. I was listening to it on audiobook, and I just think if I have another go at this, I will read it in physical format. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong with Sheldrake's narration, but I don't know if maybe just this kind of information is something that I need to take in by reading it with my eyes. So that one is something I probably will try again, but I did DNF that. I also DNF'd Ayawadi on Top by Richard Ayawadi. It was a funny little book. It is basically a, long form, I want to say essay, but not like a satirical essay, where he is doing like a quote unquote serious film critique of the Gwyneth Paltrow vehicle, View from the Top, in which Gwyneth Paltrow is trying to become a flight attendant. And it was funny enough, but I DNF'd it because it was becoming like a little old hat, I think. And I think I would have preferred that as a different format. Like, even though it was a really short book, I don't think, I love Richard Ayawadi's humor and how he kind of plays it straight when he's doing these satirical things. But I think I would have preferred that almost as you know how you can buy riff tracks for movies? I would have preferred that almost as a movie commentary that you could buy and then watch the movie and listen to Ayawadi's fake, very serious film criticism of that movie. I think that would have been fun, but I just don't think there wasn't enough meat to couldn't sustain an entire book for me. So I DNF'd that. I also sadly DNF'd Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. The book wasn't bad, and this is very much I've put it back on my shelf, but we'll probably pick it up at a different time. I think this was poor timing. I tried picking this up immediately after finishing The Color Purple by Alice Walker, and The Color Purple is so rich and lush, and the writing is just sumptuous. It is so beautifully written, and in comparison, I just don't think it was fair to read this directly after The Color Purple. I found the writing in The Silver Sparrow just to be really plain, and yeah, the writing was just too simple and too plain. The story was compelling, but just wasn't the right time for me to read that, so I also DNF'd that. I usually also share tops and bottoms of the quarter. The tops this quarter were Dancing at the Pity Party. I've already raved about that. It's a memoir of Tyler Feder, of the loss of her mother when she was 19, and it just really spoke to me personally, and I just thought it articulated feelings so well about the loss of a parent and about grief. Another top for me was To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. This was the third in a trilogy of epic fantasy novels. The Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy, which I am going to review some point probably in January. This was definitely a top because I thought it wrapped up the story really nicely. I felt completely engrossed in the world and I was like sad to stop reading it. And also it just felt really good to finish a really big book. That book was 1,060 some odd pages, and that just felt like an accomplishment. So that was definitely a top for the quarter. Another top was Islands of Decolonial Love. I've mentioned this, was the short story collection, and it's not my typical short story kind of structure, I guess. I like a very traditional arc, very traditional structure, which this is not, but it just worked for me. I felt moved by a lot of the stories. I just felt emotions. They made me reflect on things. They were like these little snapshots of people's lives. They all centered Indigenous characters, and some of them were very serious and some of them were kind of like, mundane things in someone's life, but they just all like spoke to me in some way. Well, maybe not every single story, but as a whole, the collection I thought was really strong, and I gave it 5 stars, and I just absolutely loved it. Not my normal cup of tea, but I will definitely be picking up Simpson's other stuff because it just worked for me. I can't really explain why. Another top was, I think I have to mention, The Color Purple. The writing was just so good. The story was good, like everything was good, but especially the writing, it just elevated everything else. The characters were fantastic. I read this as part of my book club, and this is a perfect book club book because there is just so much to talk about. And my bottoms for this quarter were Lady Audley's Secret, which is a sensation novel I read for Victober, which I just wasn't thrilling, wasn't sensational enough for me. I found it a little dull. So like it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't twisty and turny enough. It didn't feel sensational enough to be a sensation novel, in my opinion. And the other bottom was The Professor and the Madman, which is that dictionary nonfiction I was talking about earlier, which I put it at the bottom. It was compelling and I was completely drawn in, and I love the story. So it's not that it was bad in that sense, but some of the turns of phrase and like word choices that the author used were I didn't agree with and were frankly kind of bizarre, and he made a lot of assumptions. I will link where I talk about it in more depth in one of my wrap-ups, but he was making like assumptions that frankly have no business being in a nonfiction, even though this was like popular nonfiction. It was just like complete speculation that I think was inappropriate, frankly. So that was also in my list of bottoms, unfortunately. So let's wrap up the whole year. So I've color-coded this green and red so we can see where I succeeded and failed, and I'm about like 50-50 for my goals. So for rereading, my overall goal for the year was to reread one a month or reread 12 books. And I reread 3. So not the best there. Now, one of these was Lord of the Rings, which I only count as one book. So you could say if you counted that as like 3 books as a trilogy, then it would still only be 5 out of 12. So, I mean, I'm not like gutted or anything, but I do want to reread more, and I'm still kind of like struggling to find the time to do that. Graphic novels, there was 1 month, or 1 quarter rather, where I read a ton of graphic novels, so it kind of brought the average up. So I did end up meeting that goal. I read 14 out of 12 graphic novels that I wanted to read. Nonfiction, I just squeaked by with 13 out of 12. I wanted to read about 1 a month. And even though I hit this goal, I feel like I want to read even more nonfiction going into 2022. So, yeah, that's something I want to prioritize a little bit more, even though I did hit that goal. Poetry, I did not meet. I read 6 out of 12 poetry collections, but we'll see what I can do about that going forward. So smash reading off my physical shelves and my digital shelves which I'm very pleased with. Also met my goal for reading off of my virtual list of books I want to read from Goodreads. I almost made the BIPOC author goal. I set that at 50% and I read 48%. So I'm not displeased with that. This is something I'm going to continue to track. I probably won't put it as its own goal because it's really not about a quota or a tick mark. That's not what that goal's about. This was more so for me to just keep that on my radar because I was finding that I was reading really narrowly last year and I didn't even realize how narrow my reading was, and I don't want to read that way. So this was more so a way for me to just keep that in mind so that I'm reading with some intention and awareness. And I think this will go in really well with the next goal of reading internationally or from Canadian authors. This was kind of a fail too, so I read about a third of my reading when I really wanted to be closer to half, and I might focus more on maybe some works in translation next year because I just want to be reading from lots of different viewpoints, lots of different countries. I might make a better effort to participate in the Invisible Cities readathon or reading project next year because I don't want to just be reading from 2 countries, and I want to be reading from a lot of different people. So that's the overall look of my reading over the past year. So I think I did super well with some goals, obviously very poorly at others, but it's giving me some food for thought on what I am going to strive to do in my reading next year, how I'm going to approach reading. I want to know how you did with your reading goals. Let me know in a comment. And are you someone who has all of your reading goals for next year already in mind? Are you still figuring them out? Or are you someone who doesn't do reading goals and just reads with wild abandon? Let me know in a comment. I would love to have a chat with you. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll chat soon. Take care. Bye.